The wind howled across the desolate Wyoming prairie, carrying snowflakes that stung Zachariah Nelson's weathered face like tiny needles. It was 1879, and winter had descended on the frontier with merciless fury. He stood motionless before the wooden cross, his broad shoulders slumped beneath his heavy coat, his calloused hand gripping the brim of his hat that he'd removed in respect. 6 months had passed since they'd placed Temperance's body in this ground, yet the pain remained as fresh as the newly fallen snow. "I brought you wildflowers, Temp," he whispered, his voice carried away by the wind. "Dried 'em special, like you taught me." He placed the small bundle at the base of the cross, the brown and purple petals a stark contrast against the white landscape. The sound of crunching snow behind him didn't startle Zachariah. He'd known she was there, watching him from a distance as she often did when he made these solemn visits. He didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge her presence. Not yet. These moments with Temperance were sacred. A soft rustle of fabric and then warmth encircled his neck as gentle hands wrapped a woolen scarf around him. The familiar scent of lavender and sage enveloped him, and still, no words were exchanged between them. None were needed. Temperance Jackson's hands lingered on his shoulders for just a moment before she stepped back, giving him the space he needed to finish his private farewell. This was their ritual, performed every Sunday since the fever had taken their daughter 3 years ago. The cross marked little Sarah's final resting place, but in Zachariah's mind, it was where both his girls lay. Where his heart had been buried until Temperance had somehow brought him back to life. The story of how they'd found each other again was one that few would believe, a tale of death and resurrection that had become legend in these parts. But Zachariah knew the truth of it. He'd lived it. 5 years earlier, in the spring of 1874, Zachariah had been a different man altogether. At 32, he was already a legend across the Wyoming territory, a gunslinger with 20 notches on his belt, a bounty hunter who always got his man. He rode alone, trusted no one, and answered to nothing but his own restless demons. It was on a cool April morning when Sheriff Curtis in Laramie had handed him a wanted poster with the face of Thomas Blackburn, a notorious outlaw who'd robbed 3 stage coaches and killed a Wells Fargo agent. The bounty was substantial, $500 enough to set Zachariah up for months of comfortable living. "He's holed up somewhere near Bitter Creek," the sheriff had told him. "Word is he's got himself a woman there too, local gal who doesn't know any better, I reckon." Zachariah had nodded, tucking the poster into his saddlebag. "I'll bring him in. Dead or alive doesn't matter much to me." "Just make sure you can prove it's him," the sheriff warned. "Too many bounty hunters bringing in innocent men these days." The journey to Bitter Creek took 3 days of hard riding. The small settlement barely qualified as a town, just a general store, a saloon, and a scattering of homesteads spread across the rolling prairie. Zachariah took a room at the boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Potter, an older woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. "Don't want no trouble here," she'd warned him after one look at his gun belt. "This is a peaceful place." "Just passing through, madam," he'd assured her with a tip of his hat, "looking for work." It took only a day of careful observation and strategic questions to locate Blackburn's cabin, a small, well-built structure nestled against a stand of cottonwoods near the creek. Zachariah watched it from a distance, noting the smoke rising from the chimney, the small garden plot beside it, the 2 horses in the crude corral. A woman emerged in the late afternoon, hanging laundry on a line strung between 2 trees. Even from his hidden position, Zachariah could see she was young and comely, with long dark hair and a graceful way of moving. He decided to wait until nightfall to make his move. Blackburn was dangerous, known for his quick draw and quicker temper. Better to take him while he slept, when his guard was down. As dusk fell, Zachariah made his way silently toward the cabin. He'd left his horse tethered a half-mile away to avoid detection. The lights inside the cabin glowed warmly through the windows, and he could hear muffled voices as he approached a man's low rumble, a woman's softer tones. He positioned himself beside the door, gun drawn, ready to kick it in. That's when he heard the scream. It wasn't the scream of someone surprised or startled. It was raw, primal, the sound of true terror. Followed immediately by the crash of furniture and a man's angry shout, Zachariah didn't hesitate. He kicked open the door and burst inside, his Colt revolver leading the way. The scene before him stopped him cold. The woman lay crumpled on the floor, blood streaming from her nose, her lips split open. Above her stood Blackburn, his face contorted with rage, his hand raised to strike again. He whirled at Zachariah's entrance, his own gun appearing in his hand with startling speed. 2 shots exploded in the small cabin, so close together they sounded almost like one. Zachariah felt the burn as Blackburn's bullet grazed his shoulder, but his own aim was true. Blackburn staggered backward, a look of surprise replacing his rage as he looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest. Then he collapsed, dead before he hit the floor. The woman didn't scream again. She simply stared, first at Blackburn's body, then at Zachariah, her dark eyes wide with shock. She was younger than he'd thought, perhaps 22 or 23, with delicate features and skin the color of honey. Despite the blood and swelling, he could see she was beautiful. "He's dead," Zachariah said simply, holstering his gun. "Are you badly hurt?" She touched her lip gingerly, wincing. "I'll live." Her voice was soft but steady. "Who are you?" "Zachariah Nelson, bounty hunter." He nodded toward the dead man. "He was wanted in Laramie." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You came for the bounty." "Yes, madam." She pushed herself to her feet, swaying slightly. Zachariah stepped forward to steady her, but she held up a hand to stop him. "My name is Temperance Jackson," she said with quiet dignity. "That man was not my husband, despite what he told everyone. He forced me to come with him 3 months ago, killed my father when he tried to stop him." Her voice broke slightly. "I've been his prisoner ever since." Zachariah felt something shift inside him, something he couldn't name. "I'm sorry, Miss Jackson." "Mrs." She corrected him softly. "I'm a widow. My husband died in the war." The simplicity of her statement, the quiet strength behind it, struck him. He'd met many women in his travels, saloon girls, farmers' daughters, even the occasional lady of society, but none had affected him quite like this brave, battered woman standing before him with such composure. "You'll need to come with me to Laramie," he told her, "to give your statement." She nodded, then suddenly paled and would have fallen if he hadn't caught her. The feel of her in his arms awakened something protective in Zachariah, something he'd thought long dead after years of hunting men for money. "Let me tend to your wound first," she murmured, looking at his bleeding shoulder. "It's nothing, just a graze." Nevertheless. Her tone brooked no argument. She gently extricated herself from his support and moved to a cabinet, retrieving a small box of medical supplies. With practiced hands, she cleaned and bandaged his shoulder, her touch light yet sure. "You've done this before," he observed. "My husband was a medic in the Union Army. He taught me." She finished securing the bandage. "There, that should hold until we reach Laramie." They buried Blackburn at first light, a simple, hasty grave marked only by a pile of stones. Temperance said no words over him, showed no emotion as the dirt covered his body. But as they prepared to leave, she stood for a moment looking back at the cabin. "I planted those flowers," she said softly, "and mended the roof. Even in captivity, I tried to make something of it." Zachariah understood. It was the way of women like her, finding beauty and purpose even in the darkest circumstances. The journey to Laramie took 4 days. They traveled slowly, mindful of Temperance's injuries and the worsening weather. Spring in Wyoming was unpredictable, and a cold rain fell intermittently, soaking them despite their slickers. At night, Zachariah made sure Temperance had the best spot near the fire, using his own blanket to create a shelter for her. He hunted rabbits and sage hens for their meals, and was surprised when she took over the cooking, creating savory stews with the few provisions they had. They spoke little at first, but as the miles passed, a cautious trust began to develop. Temperance told him of her life born in Ohio, married at 18 to a young doctor who joined the Union Army and never returned, moving west with her father to start anew in Wyoming. Zachariah shared less. uncomfortable with revealing the darker chapters of his past. But he did tell her about his childhood in Texas, his years as a cowhand before the war changed everything. In Laramie, Sheriff Curtis was visibly relieved to see Zachariah return. "Began to think Blackburn got the better of you," he admitted, counting out the bounty money. "No, sir, just took some time to handle things proper." Zachariah nodded toward Temperance, who waited outside. "The lady needs help. Blackburn abducted her, killed her father." The sheriff's face softened with sympathy. "We'll take care of her. The Jensen family just lost their housekeeper. Might be they could use a good woman's help, give her a place to stay." And so it was arranged. The Jensens, Carl and Martha, owned the largest mercantile in Laramie and lived in a fine house at the edge of town. They took to Temperance immediately, impressed by her refined manners and quiet competence. For her part, Temperance seemed grateful for the safe haven and honest work. Zachariah had intended to collect his bounty and move on, as he always did. There were other wanted men, other rewards to collect, but something kept him in Laramie. He told himself it was the promise of work. The sheriff had mentioned trouble with cattle rustlers that the ranchers might pay to resolve, but in truth, he found himself riding past the Jensen house each day, tipping his hat when Temperance happened to be in the yard or on the porch. Sometimes she would wave back, a small smile on her face. Other times she would invite him to sit a spell, offering coffee or freshly baked bread. They would talk of simple things: the changing weather, news from town, the antics of the Jensen children whom Temperance had come to adore. It was during one such visit, nearly 2 months after they'd first met, that Temperance asked the question he'd been dreading. "Why do you do it, Mr. Nelson? Hunt men for money?" They were sitting on the Jensen's front porch, watching a summer storm roll in from the mountains. Zachariah took his time answering, rolling a cigarette between his fingers. "It's what I'm good at," he finally said. "Been tracking things since I was a boy. First animals, then men during the war. After that, well, seemed natural to put the skill to use. But to kill for profit." She let the thought hang unfinished. "I don't always kill them." He struck a match, lit the cigarette. "Prefer to bring him in alive when I can, but men like Blackburn, they don't give you much choice." Temperance was quiet for a long moment. "I've never thanked you properly, have I?" "For saving me." "No need for thanks, was just doing my job." "Was it?" Her eyes, the color of rich coffee, studied him intently. "Or was it something more?" Before he could answer, the heavens opened. Rain poured down in sheets, forcing them to retreat inside. The moment passed, but Zachariah carried her words with him, turning them over in his mind like a prospector examining an unexpected nugget of gold. A week later, he took a job tracking rustlers for the Barton Ranch, 15 miles outside of Laramie. Before he left, he stopped by the Jensen house to say goodbye to Temperance. He found her in the garden harvesting late summer vegetables. "I'll be gone a while," he told her. "Month, maybe more." She straightened, brushing soil from her hands. "Be careful, Mr. Nelson. Always am." He hesitated, then added, "I was thinking, when I get back, maybe we could take a proper ride together, see some of that country to the north. It's pretty this time of year." The smile that bloomed on her face warmed him more than any fire could have. "I'd like that very much." What Zachariah couldn't have known as he rode away was how his life and hers would change in the weeks to come. The rustlers he pursued were more organized and dangerous than anyone had suspected, part of a larger operation that stretched across 3 territories. The pursuit led him into Montana, through treacherous mountain passes and remote valleys. It was nearly 2 months before he returned to Laramie, bringing with him the leaders of the rustling operation to face justice. He'd been wounded twice, a bullet through his left arm and a knife slash across his ribs, but he'd survived, driven by thoughts of the promise he'd made to Temperance. But when he arrived at the Jensen house, exhausted and dust-covered, it was Martha Jensen who met him at the door, her face grave. "She's gone, Mr. Nelson, taken ill with the fever that swept through town last month." The world seemed to tilt beneath his feet. "Dead," Martha shook her head quickly. "No, thank the Lord, but very weak still. The doctor sent her to recuperate at the hot springs near Thermopolis. Said the waters might help restore her strength." Relief washed over him, followed immediately by determination. How long ago? 2 weeks now. Carl's cousin accompanied her, but she's due back soon. Zachariah didn't wait. He collected his bounty from the sheriff, purchased fresh supplies, and within hours was on the trail again, heading northwest toward the healing waters of Thermopolis. The journey took 3 days of hard riding. The hot springs were a well-known landmark, a place where the mineral-rich waters bubbled up from deep within the earth, creating pools of varying temperatures. A small settlement had sprung up nearby, offering accommodations for those seeking the water's reputed healing properties. He found her at the largest of the boarding houses, a comfortable 2-story structure set among cottonwood trees. She was sitting on the wide front porch in a rocking chair, wrapped in blankets despite the warm autumn day. Her face was thinner, her skin paler than he remembered, but her eyes lit up when she saw him approaching. "Zachariah," she said, using his given name for the first time. "You came." He removed his hat, suddenly aware of his trail-worn appearance. "Heard you were ailing, thought you might need assistance." Her smile was weak but genuine. "I'm much improved, truly. Another week and I'll be strong enough to return to Laramie." "No rush," he said, settling into the chair beside hers. "These water's supposed to be good medicine. You should take all the time you need." She studied him with those perceptive eyes of hers. "You're injured," he shrugged. "Nothing serious. Show me." With reluctance, he rolled up his sleeve to reveal the healing bullet wound. Temperance leaned forward, examining it with professional interest. "It's healing clean," she pronounced. "But you should soak it in the springs. The minerals will help." And so began a strange, peaceful interlude in their lives. Zachariah took a room at the boarding house, spending his days either soaking his wounds in the healing waters or sitting with Temperance as she gradually regained her strength. They talked more freely than before, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their regrets. He told her about his wife, Mary, dead these 10 years from childbirth, and the infant son who died with her. She spoke of her husband James, his gentle nature, his dreams of starting a medical practice in the West after the war. "We are both acquainted with grief," she observed one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Yes," he agreed, "but perhaps that's why we recognize something in each other." She turned to him, a question in her eyes. "What do you recognize in me, Zachariah?" He wasn't a man given to poetic speech or grand declarations. But in that moment, with the dying light gilding her face and the scent of sage in the air, he found the words. "Strength," he said simply, "a kind of courage I've never had. You make something beautiful wherever you go, Temperance. Even in that cabin with Blackburn you planted flowers, you find hope where others see only darkness." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "And what do I see in you? A man who thinks himself beyond redemption, yet risks his life to save strangers. A man who believes himself hard, yet shows such tenderness." He looked away, uncomfortable with her assessment. "You give me too much credit, or perhaps you give yourself too little." Her hand found his, her fingers cool against his sun-warmed skin. "There is goodness in you, Zachariah Nelson, more than you know." That touch, simple as it was, changed everything between them. In the days that followed, they grew closer, their conversations deeper, their silences more companionable. Sometimes her hand would find his as they walked along the paths near the springs. Sometimes his arm would support her when she tired. And always, there was that current of understanding between them, a recognition of kindred spirits who had survived loss and emerged stronger. As autumn deepened, Temperance's health improved dramatically. Color returned to her cheeks, strength to her limbs. Soon she was helping the boarding house keeper with light duties, her natural nurturing instincts finding outlet in caring for other guests who came seeking the water's healing. Zachariah watched her revival with a mixture of joy and trepidation. With her health restored, she would return to Laramie, to her position with the Jensens. And he? What would he do? The thought of returning to his solitary life as a bounty hunter no longer held any appeal, but what alternatives did a man with his skills and history have? The answer came unexpectedly from the owner of the boarding house, Mrs. Hollister, a shrewd businesswoman who'd taken a liking to both Zachariah and Temperance. "Got word from my brother in Casper," she told them one morning at breakfast. "He's selling his ranch. Nothing grand, 300 acres, small herd of cattle, decent house. Says he's getting too old for the work, wants to move to Denver where his daughter lives." Zachariah nodded politely, not seeing how this concerned him. "Price is fair," Mrs. Hollister continued, her sharp eyes on Zachariah. "Man with some savings could make a go of it, especially if he had a capable woman at his side." The meaning of her words sank in slowly. Zachariah glanced at Temperance, who was studying her coffee cup with sudden intense interest, a flush rising in her cheeks. "Something to think about, Mrs. Hollister concluded, rising from the table with a knowing smile. That evening, Zachariah and Temperance walked along the creek that flowed from the hot springs, the water steaming slightly in the cool autumn air. They'd been quiet since breakfast, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Zachariah broke the silence. "Never thought of myself as a rancher." Temperance looked up at him. "What did you think of yourself as," he considered the question, "a drifter, a hunter, a man with no real place in the world?" And now, he stopped walking, turned to face her. "Now I'm thinking maybe it's time to put down roots, if I had the right reason to." Her eyes held his steady and clear. "What would be the right reason, Zachariah?" "You." The word came out rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat. "I know it's sudden, we haven't known each other long. And I'm not the kind of man most women would choose. I've lived hard, done things I'm not proud of, but with you I feel different, better." Temperance's expression softened. "It's not so sudden as all that. Sometimes the heart recognizes what it needs before the mind can catch up." She took a deep breath. "I care for you, Zachariah, more than I thought possible after James, but I need to know what kind of life you envision. I've seen too much violence. I want peace, a home, perhaps, children someday." The word children struck him like a physical blow, bringing back memories of Mary and their stillborn son. But looking at Temperance, her strength, her resilience, he knew it could be different this time. "I want those things too," he said quietly. "With you, no more hunting men, no more drifting. Just us, building something together." Her smile was radiant. "Then perhaps we should look at this ranch Mrs. Hollister mentioned." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church at Thermopolis, with Mrs. Hollister and a few of the boarding house guests as witnesses. Temperance wore a simple blue dress ordered from the general store, with wildflowers in her hair. Zachariah, in a new suit that felt stiff and strange, thought he'd never seen anything more beautiful than his bride's face as she spoke her vows. They traveled to Casper the following day to see the ranch. It was everything Mrs. Hollister had described, not grand, but solid and full of potential. The house was well built, with 3 bedrooms and a spacious kitchen. The land was good for grazing, with a year-round creek running through it. The cattle, though few in number, were healthy. Zachariah paid cash, using the savings from years of bounty hunting. It felt right, somehow, that the money earned from taking lives would now go toward building a new one. Their first year as ranchers was harder than either had anticipated. The winter of 1875-76 was brutal, with blizzards that threatened the cattle and temperatures so low that the creek froze solid. Zachariah worked from dawn until well after dark, feeding the animals, breaking ice, repairing damage from the storms. Temperance kept the house warm and welcoming, learned to cook on the temperamental wood stove, and often helped with the outdoor work as well. But they faced each challenge together, finding strength in their growing love. By spring, when the land greened and calves began to appear in the herd, they knew they'd made the right choice. In the summer of 1876, Temperance discovered she was expecting a child. The news brought both joy and fear to Zachariah, memories of Mary's death shadowing his happiness. But Temperance's calm confidence gradually eased his worries. "This is not the same," she told him one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her growing belly. "I'm strong, Zachariah, and we have a good doctor in Casper. All will be well." Their daughter Sarah was born on a cold January morning in 1877, healthy and strong-lunged. Zachariah, who had paced outside the bedroom during the long hours of labor, felt his heart expand with love when the doctor placed the tiny, red-faced infant in his arms. "She has your eyes," he told Temperance, who lay exhausted but radiant in their bed. "And your chin," she replied with a smile. "God willing, not your stubbornness." Life settled into a rhythm of seasons and growth. The ranch prospered under their care. They added to the herd, improved the house, planted an orchard. Zachariah discovered he had a talent for breeding horses, and soon their stock was sought after by ranchers throughout the territory. Temperance created a thriving garden and began to experiment with medicinal herbs, drawing on knowledge from her late husband and the traditional remedies she learned from local Native American women. Sarah grew into a lively, curious child with her mother's dark eyes and her father's determination. She followed Zachariah everywhere as soon as she could walk, demanding to help with the horses, the cattle, anything her small hands could manage. He taught her to ride before she was 3, much to Temperance's mixed amusement and concern. "She's fearless," Temperance observed, watching their daughter urge her pony into a trot across the yard. "Like her mother," Zachariah replied, his arm around his wife's waist. The summer of 1879 brought drought to Wyoming. Creeks dried up, grass withered, cattle grew thin. Ranchers throughout the territory struggled to keep their herds alive. Zachariah worked harder than ever, digging deeper wells, moving the animals to what little good grazing remained, hauling water in barrels from the North Platte River miles away. It was during this difficult time that fever swept through Casper and the surrounding areas. No one knew exactly what caused it. Some blamed the poor water quality, others the unusual heat. Whatever the cause, it struck with terrible swiftness and virulence. Sarah fell ill first, developing a high fever and racking cough. Temperance nursed her day and night, using every remedy she knew, but the child's condition worsened rapidly. Zachariah rode to Casper for the doctor, pushing his horse to exhaustion, but by the time they returned, it was too late. Sarah died in Temperance's arms just before dawn, not yet 3 years old. They buried her on a small rise overlooking the ranch, where wildflowers bloomed in spring. Zachariah fashioned a cross from cedar wood, carving her name and the dates of her brief life with painstaking care. Temperance planted roses at the base of the cross, roses that would bloom year after year in memory of their daughter. The loss nearly destroyed them. Zachariah retreated into silence, spending long hours alone with the horses or riding the boundaries of their land. Temperance threw herself into caring for others affected by the fever, traveling to neighboring ranches to offer what help she could, often returning home exhausted and hollow-eyed. They rarely spoke of Sarah, the pain too raw, too deep for words. But sometimes at night, Zachariah would awaken to the sound of Temperance's quiet weeping, and he would hold her until the tears subsided, his own grief a silent, crushing weight in his chest. It was on one such night, nearly 2 months after Sarah's death, that Temperance finally broke their unspoken agreement not to discuss their loss. "I keep thinking I hear her," she whispered into the darkness. "Her little feet on the floor, her laugh, I reach for her before I'm fully awake." Zachariah's throat tightened. "I see her everywhere, by the corral in the fields, like she's just out of reach." "I'm afraid I'll forget her face," Temperance confessed, her voice breaking. "Already it's less clear." He pulled her closer. "We won't forget, I promise you that." "But it's fading, Zachariah." The sound of her voice, the feel of her hand in mine, it's slipping away. He had no answer for this, knew it to be true from his own experience with loss. Time eroded memory, no matter how desperately one tried to hold on. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "that's how we survive it. If we remembered it all, felt it all the time, we couldn't bear it." She was quiet for a long moment. "Do you think, someday, we might have another child?" The question caught him off guard. Since Sarah's death, the thought of another child had seemed impossible, almost a betrayal of their daughter's memory. "Is that what you want?" he asked carefully. "Not to replace her," Temperance clarified quickly. "Nothing could ever do that, but to go on to love again." He considered her words. "Yes," he finally said, "someday when we're both ready." It was a turning point, small but significant. They began to talk about Sarah more openly, sharing memories, sometimes even finding moments of laughter amidst the grief. Slowly, day by day, they found their way back to each other. But fate had one more cruel twist in store for them. In early September, with the drought still gripping the land, Temperance fell ill with the same fever that had taken Sarah. At first, she dismissed it as exhaustion, refusing to rest despite Zachariah's pleas. By the time she admitted the severity of her condition, the fever had taken firm hold. Zachariah never left her side, bathing her burning skin with cool water, forcing broth and medicine between her cracked lips, praying with a fervor he hadn't felt since childhood. For 6 days and nights, the fever raged. On the 7th morning, Temperance opened her eyes, clear and focused for the first time in days. "Zachariah," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I'm here." He grasped her hand, hope surging through him at this sign of improvement. "I saw her," Temperance said, "our Sarah. She was waiting for me." Fear clutched at his heart. "Don't talk like that, you're getting better, you'll be up and about before you know it," she smiled faintly. "Always so stubborn." Her eyes drifted closed. "So tired." "Then rest," he urged, "I'll be right here." Her breathing seemed easier as she slipped into sleep, and Zachariah allowed himself to believe the crisis had passed. He dozed in the chair beside the bed, still holding her hand. When he woke, the room was filled with the golden light of late afternoon, and Temperance's hand had grown cold in his. He buried her beside Sarah, another cedar cross marking the grave. The neighbors came for the service ranchers and their wives, traders from Casper, even a few Shoshone from the nearby reservation who had come to respect Temperance for her healing skills and generous spirit. Zachariah stood dry-eyed through the prayers and condolences. He thanked people mechanically for the food they brought, the offers of help with the ranch. But inside, he was hollow, empty of everything but a dull, throbbing ache where his heart had been. When everyone had gone, he remained by the grave, staring at the freshly turned earth, the new cross bearing the name that had become the center of his world. He stayed until the stars appeared, until the September chill penetrated his thin shirt, until his legs could no longer support him. Only then did he return to the house, their house now echoing with absence. The months that followed passed in a blur of mindless work and sleepless nights. Zachariah drove himself relentlessly, taking on tasks that would have required 3 men, expanding the ranch, adding to the herd. He spoke to no one unless absolutely necessary, avoided town, rebuffed concerned neighbors. By December, when the first heavy snow blanketed the land, he had become almost feral in his isolation. His beard was untrimmed, his clothes dirty and torn. He ate little, slept less, drank whiskey to numb the constant pain of remembering. It was on the shortest day of the year, with darkness falling by mid-afternoon, that he rode up to the small hill where his wife and daughter lay buried. Snow had drifted against the crosses, nearly obscuring them. Zachariah dismounted, brushed the snow away with hands gone numb from cold. He knelt between the graves, heedless of the wet soaking through his pants. "I can't do it," he said aloud. "Can't live without you, don't want to." The wind was his only answer, cutting through his inadequate clothing, carrying snow that stung his face. He made no move to leave, to seek shelter. Perhaps this was best to join them here, to let the cold take him as the fever had taken them. He closed his eyes, felt the numbness spreading from his hands and feet inward. There was a certain peace in it, a letting go. "Zachariah." The voice was so clear, so present that he jerked upright, eyes flying open, but there was no one there, just the darkening sky, the endless white landscape. "Zachariah Nelson, don't you dare." It was Temperance's voice, as distinct as if she stood beside him. Firm, no nonsense, the tone she used when he was being particularly stubborn. "Temp," he whispered. No answer came, just the wind, the snow, the gathering darkness, but something had changed. He felt it, a presence, a warmth that had nothing to do with physical heat. Slowly, painfully, he got to his feet. His horse stood patiently nearby, steam rising from its nostrils. Zachariah looked at the crosses once more, then mounted and rode back to the ranch. That night he built a fire in the fireplace for the first time since Temperance's death. He washed, trimmed his beard, put on clean clothes. He ate a proper meal, simple but nourishing, and for the first time in months he slept without nightmares. When he woke, pale winter sunlight was streaming through the windows. Zachariah lay still for a moment, taking stock. The crushing grief was still there, but something else had returned, as well, a sense of purpose, of obligation. To live, to care for the land and animals that had been so important to Temperance. To honor her memory not with despair but with the kind of strength she had always shown, he rose, dressed, and went outside to begin the day's work. The air was bitterly cold, the sky a hard, clear blue. As he crossed the yard toward the barn, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A figure stood by the corral, a woman in a dark cloak, her back to him. For one wild moment he thought it was Temperance. But as she turned, he saw it was a stranger, young, with copper-colored hair visible beneath her hood. "Mr. Nelson," she called, her voice carrying in the still morning air. He approached warily. "Yes, I'm Talia James." She stepped forward, extending a gloved hand. "Mrs. Hollister from Thermopolis sent me," she said. "She said you might need help with the ranch." Zachariah stared at her, confused. "Mrs. Hollister, I haven't seen her in years." "She keeps track of people she cares about," the young woman explained, "when she heard about your wife." "My condolences, by the way. She thought you might need assistance. I've been looking for work since my father passed. I can cook, clean, tend to a garden come spring." He should refuse. He wanted no one in Temperance's kitchen, touching her things, disturbing the memories that lingered there. But something, perhaps the determination in Talia James's green eyes or the memory of Temperance's voice the night before, stopped him. "It's hard work," he said gruffly, "and lonely, not much company out here." She smiled slightly. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Nelson. And I prefer quiet to the alternative." After a moment's consideration, he nodded. "There's a small cabin behind the house. Used to be for ranch hands before it was just me. You can stay there. We'll try it for a month, see how it goes." "Thank you," she inclined her head. "I'll do my best not to disappoint you." Talia James proved to be as capable as she'd claimed. She brought order back to the chaotic house, cooked simple but satisfying meals, and showed a surprising aptitude for ranch work as well. She never tried to replace Temperance's things or change the home Temperance had created, but gently restored it to the welcoming place it had once been. Zachariah kept his distance at first, speaking to her only when necessary. But gradually, her unobtrusive presence became a comfort rather than an intrusion. She seemed to understand his grief, never pushing for conversation but available if he chose to engage. He learned, bit by bit, that she was 26, had nursed her father through a long illness, and had worked as a schoolteacher in Cheyenne before his death. She was well-read, with a quiet wit that occasionally surprised a reluctant smile from him. By the time spring arrived, thawing the land and bringing new growth, Zachariah found himself looking forward to their evening meals, to the sound of her voice reading aloud from one of the books she'd brought with her, to the simple human connection that had been missing from his life. On the anniversary of Temperance's death, he rode up to the graves alone. The crosses stood stark against the September sky, but now wildflowers bloomed around them, planted, he knew, by Talia's hands. "I'm trying," he told Temperance as he knelt between the graves. "To live, to go on, I think." "I think you'd want that." When he returned to the ranch, he found Talia waiting on the porch, a book open on her lap. She looked up as he approached, a question in her eyes. "Would you walk with me?" he asked, the words coming easier than he'd expected. They walked along the creek, now flowing strong after the spring and summer rains. The land was green and vibrant, the cattle fat, colts gamboling in the pasture. "The ranch is doing well," Talia observed. "You should be proud." "It's not just my doing," he acknowledged. "You've been a godsend." She glanced at him, surprised by the admission. "I've been happy here, happier than I expected to be." Zachariah stopped walking, turned to face her. "Your year's almost up." "The agreement with Mrs. Hollister." Talia's face fell slightly. "Yes, I suppose it is. I'd like you to stay." The words rushed out before he could reconsider. Not as hired help, as a partner in the ranch, if you're willing." She studied him carefully. Is that all you're asking, Zachariah, a business arrangement? It was the first time she'd used his given name, and it affected him more than he'd anticipated. No, he admitted. It's not all, but I don't know if I have the right to ask for more. Temperance, she was everything to me. I don't know if there's enough of my heart left to offer anyone else. I would never ask you to forget her, Talia said softly, or to love me as you loved her, but perhaps there's room for a different kind of love, one that honors what came before while embracing what could be. He considered her words. You're a wise woman, Talia James. Not wise, she corrected with a small smile. Just someone who understands that the heart is not a finite thing, it expands to hold what it needs. Zachariah reached out, took her hand. It felt right, this connection, this possibility. Not a replacement for what he'd lost, but something new, unexpected, and precious in its own way. Will you stay? He asked again. Not as a partner, but as my wife. If you think you could be happy with a man who carries the ghosts of his past with him, her fingers tightened around his. We all have ghosts, Zachariah. The question is whether we let them haunt us or guide us. She stepped closer. Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll be your wife. And yes, I believe we can find happiness together. They were married in October, a simple ceremony in the Casper Church with Mrs. Hollister, orchestrator of this second chance at happiness, as their primary witness. They held a celebration at the ranch afterward, neighbors and friends gathering to wish them well. Late that evening, after the guests had departed, Zachariah took Talia's hand. There's somewhere I'd like to take you. He led her up the hill to the graves, now bathed in moonlight. Talia had been there many times to tend the flowers, but never with him. I wanted them to be part of today, he explained, his voice rough with emotion. Temperance would have liked you. She would have wanted me to find peace, to live fully again. Talia squeezed his hand. I believe she does want that, Zachariah. I feel her blessing in this place. They stood together in silence, honoring the past while embracing their future. And if the moonlight seemed to shimmer unusually brightly around them, if the night breeze carried a whisper of familiar laughter, neither mentioned it. Some things were best left unspoken, held close in the heart where they belonged. The years passed, bringing changes to the ranch and to their family. A son, Zachary, was born in the summer of 1881, followed by twin girls, Temperance and Sarah, in 1883. The ranch prospered, expanding to include a successful horse breeding operation. Zachariah's animals became known throughout the territory for their strength and intelligence. Talia opened a small school on the ranch, teaching their children and those from neighboring homesteads. Her classroom, a converted barn, became a gathering place for the scattered community, hosting holiday celebrations and Sunday socials. Through it all, Zachariah maintained his Sunday visits to the graves on the hill. Sometimes Talia and the children would accompany him, bringing fresh flowers or small treasures the children wanted to share with the mother and sister they knew only through stories. Other times he went alone, finding solace in the quiet communion with his first family. It was on such a Sunday in December 1895, 16 years after Temperance's death, that the incident occurred that would become part of the Nelson family lore for generations to come. The winter had arrived early and with unusual ferocity. Snow lay deep across the ranch, and more was falling as Zachariah made his solitary trek to the hilltop. At 53, his hair was now more gray than brown, his face weathered by years of working outdoors, but he remained strong and vital. He stood before the crosses, now weathered but well-maintained, and removed his hat as was his custom. The wind bit at his exposed skin, the snowflakes coming faster as the storm intensified. 16 years, he murmured. Some days it feels like yesterday, some days like another lifetime. He told them, as he always did, about the events of the past week, Zachary's progress with breaking the new colts, the twins' success at the Casper Christmas pageant, Talia's plans for expanding the school in the spring. As he spoke, the storm worsened. The wind howled across the prairie, driving the snow horizontally. Visibility decreased rapidly until he could barely see a few feet in front of him. He knew he should head back to the house before the blizzard made travel impossible, but something kept him rooted to the spot, a strange reluctance to leave. The cold penetrated his heavy coat, making him shiver. Still, he lingered, feeling oddly as if he were waiting for something, though he couldn't have said what. Then, through the curtain of white, he saw a figure approaching a woman in a dark cloak, moving with graceful certainty despite the blinding snow. For a breathless moment he thought it might be Temperance, her spirit made manifest in the storm. But as the figure drew closer, he recognized Talia, her red hair briefly visible as the wind pushed back her hood. She didn't speak, didn't scold him for staying out in the dangerous weather. She simply unwound the long woolen scarf from around her neck and wrapped it gently around his, her eyes holding his with a look of such understanding that words would have been superfluous. The gesture, so simple yet so profound, brought unexpected tears to Zachariah's eyes. In that moment, with the snow swirling around them and the crosses standing silent witness, he felt the presence of all those he loved past and present, living and dead connected in an unbroken circle of devotion. Talia took his arm, and together they made their way down the hill toward home, toward the warm lights shining through the windows, toward the children waiting for their return. Behind them, the crosses disappeared into the white blur of the storm, but Zachariah carried them with him, as he always would, not as burdens of grief, but as treasured markers of a love that had shaped him, that had prepared him to love again. "They're always with us," Talia said quietly as they neared the house, "in ways we can't always understand." "Yes," Zachariah agreed, his arm tightening around hers, "in the children, in the land, in the love we've built together." They paused at the porch steps, looking back at their footprints already filling with fresh snow at the storm that had nearly claimed him. Zachariah felt a profound gratitude wash over him for Temperance, who had taught him to love, for Sarah, who had brought such joy to their brief time as a family, for Talia, who had shown him that the heart could heal without forgetting, and for the strange, winding path that had brought him to this moment of perfect clarity. "Come inside," Talia urged, her hand warm in his despite the cold. "They're waiting for us." As they entered the house, filled with light and the sounds of their children's laughter, Zachariah knew with certainty that this, too, was part of Temperance's legacy, this second chance, this renewed life. It hadn't been a betrayal to love again, but the fulfillment of a promise made long ago. To live fully, to find joy, to create beauty even from loss. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the land in a blanket of white, connecting heaven and earth, past and present, in its silent, peaceful embrace. And somewhere, beyond the veil that separates this world from the next, Zachariah believed that Temperance was smiling, her gentle spirit rejoicing in the happiness he had found in the family that carried her memory forward into the future. For love, he had learned, was not diminished by sharing but multiplied. It transcended death, survived grief, and emerged stronger for having been tested by both. It was the one true legacy they would all leave behind, the love that had brought a bounty hunter and a kidnapped woman together on a spring evening long ago, that had given them a daughter, that had survived unimaginable loss, and that continued to flourish in this home built on second chances and unwavering hope. And in the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.